Hey everyone, George here and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about diseases and medications for your fish and getting it right the first time. This is a very difficult subject to talk about, and it's very hard to diagnose so many different things out there that can happen in your tanks. Now, I recently went through something that was very difficult for me, and I didn't get it right the first time. So I lost a fish that was an expensive fish, and one that I really had for a long time, and it was pretty devastating to me. So I thought this was a subject that we should talk about because sometimes medications are not used properly, or diseases are misdiagnosed, let's put it that way. And it's really important that we get it right the first time, because sometimes the medication can be actually worse than the disease itself. Hang in there with me. When we come back, we're going to be talking about this subject. We'll be right back. So, as I said in the intro, it is a very difficult subject to talk about diseases and medication in your fish. And I don't want to take a zillion years on this, but I think this is a subject that does require a little more time. And I hope you'll follow this video all the way through, because I'm going to give you some ideas on how to, number one, prevent disease, and number two, if something does happen, I'm going to tell you how to sort of work with medications that are mild and work your way up to something more severe if necessary. And we're going to talk about that pretty thoroughly today. So I hope you'll hang in there with me till the end of the video, and we'll see if we can help some people out there that are struggling with this particular subject. Now, the first thing we want to look at is the number one thing that people talk to me about is ick and or slime coat diseases of some kind. And two of these things are very preventable in any tank. Number one, if you know your supplier and you're getting fish from somebody that you know who quarantines their fish and takes care of these problems before they ever get to your tank, number one, you should always quarantine your fish. Every fish that comes into your house or your gallery, if you have multiple tanks, you should have a quarantine tank or a hospital tank set up to where these fish can go, be observed. I don't say medicate right off the top. I don't believe in doing that. I believe that in the quarantine tank, you should observe these fish and make sure this is a well-cycled quarantine tank. It's not something that you've set up here just recently and has no history, because that's just asking for trouble too. So we're going to talk about some of these medications. Number one, salt. Salt is something that is controversial about whether or not it should be used in freshwater tanks. And I'm not going to be getting into salt water today. We're going to be talking about freshwater fish only, obviously with salt. We're not using that in a saltwater tank anyway, but we're going to talk about this a little bit. I really believe that this can be a preventative, and I try to put a small amount of salt in my quarantine tanks just to give that slime coat that extra little bit of a boost in electrolytes and things like that that are necessary to get your fish off to a good start. And so I keep this on hand. I don't use it in my tanks on a routine basis. In other words, once the fish have left the quarantine tank and have moved over to a community tank of some sort or a new tank that I've set up, I don't use the salt any longer. It's only something, like I said, that I use as a boost for the fish to get their electrolytes going and the healing of their slime coat, because a lot of times these fish show up with, they've been netted, especially if they're discus or larger fish like angels and that sort of thing. They can show up with scars from the netting, and that bacterial infection can set in. This can prevent that a lot of times. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is a product by Seachem called Paragard. I love this stuff, and I'll tell you why. Every fish that comes into my gallery and is quarantined, I use this for 3 days, and there's instructions on the back as to how you are to use this. Please follow those instructions, because people think that Paragard is something that you can't overdose on your fish, but you can easily do that if you're not careful. So Paragard I use because it will take care of ick situations. Pump your temperature up a little bit in your tank, get it up past the point of ick being able to survive. Use the Paragard for 3 days. Do a 40% water change at that point, and then put a small amount of salt in afterwards. You don't need a tremendous amount of salt. There's a lot of controversy, and it's kind of all over the board as to how much salt you should use in a tank. I mean, people use outrageous amounts of salt in a tank, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily good. But once you do that 40% water change after 3 days of using this, I really do recommend putting a small amount of salt in there. And as you gradually do the water changes, which you should be doing every week on your tanks, that salt will dissipate over time. Now, the second disease that I see really often, especially in discus fish, angels, or any larger fish, are parasitical situations that are internal. And I'm talking about specifically internal parasites like worms of some kind, tapeworms. There's all kinds of different parasites that your fish can bring into your tank. And you'll see it because they'll be pooping that white stringy poop out, and that's a sign that you've got a parasitical problem internally in your fish. And I try to treat that with a couple of different things. Now, this would be my go-to. Pro is the number one thing that I always go with if I see that kind of a problem arising. Some people actually use this as a preventative, or use it monthly even, just to make sure that they don't get parasites in their tank. Now, the only reason they would be doing that is if they're feeding live foods. I try to stay away from the live foods, because I know that even though my supplier might be good for blackworms and things like that are tempting to feed your discus and your angel fish, I try to stay away from it. But if you do think you have a problem with an internal parasite, this would be the number one thing that I would go with. It's very effective. It's very easy on your biological filtration system. It will not tear it down as long as you're using it properly, just like anything else. But it really is a great product for that sort of thing. Now, if you can't get that under control with the Prozi Pro, then this is the next best thing right here. And this can be purchased through Watley Discus, and it is metronidazole. And I will put the instructions on how to use this down below. I don't want to waste a lot of our video time telling you about this, but this is pure metronidazole, and putting this in your tank, or if your fish are eating, if you can make up some kind of a concoction of food and roll it into this using maybe Focus or another type of bonding agent with the food, then they get this internally. That's the best way to do this. But if you can't do that, and you have a community tank that's got this problem, then you want to use this product directly in the tank. Again, preferably in a quarantine tank. But if it has to be used in a community tank and you have a breakout of some kind that's a problem, you don't have any choice, this is a great product. And I'm telling you, I know people that actually use this once every couple of months that feed their fish live worms, particularly red worms and black worms. I don't feed red worms at all because I'm positive that the red worms carry a lot of parasitical problems that you can bring into your tank. So the next thing we're going to go from there is, whenever I get new fish into my tank, I always use a little bit of Stress Guard. Now, I'm not trying to sell Seachem here. I know a lot of these products have the Seachem name on it. They don't sponsor me, and I do not promote them. I'm just telling you about products that I am familiar with and that I think are important for you to have a little bit of knowledge about, and things that have worked for me. Stress Guard is so important. I think that if you see no disease in your fish whatsoever, at a minimum, you should be putting this in a new batch of fish that are going into a quarantine tank. I think you should absolutely use some of this because it has some antiseptics in there and some agents that will help any surface body sores or cuts or anything like that. This will help those heal and keep that slime coat in good condition. Now, things can sometimes get bad, and we don't know where to go. We've tried all of these things, and we still have problems with a parasitical problem with your fish that is either bacterial, parasitical, or some kind of problem with the slime coat or whatever that we just don't know about. And this is where it gets kind of tricky, because at this point here, you've gone past what 90% of us are going to be doing to get our new fish in our quarantine tanks off to a good start. But if things start to go sideways and you have a problem, and it does happen, then you got to start thinking about using some of these things right here. Now, ICX, if you have an ick problem, this stuff here, I swear by it. I know that Corey up at Aquarium Co-op pushes this really hard, and I'm not sure that he's doing it because they're sponsoring him or whatever. I really believe that he believes that this works really well for ick, velvet, and other diseases that your fish have. And this would be my next step in trying to control something like that if you see an outbreak of ick. That does happen at times, and it's often because we're not quarantining our fish properly, or the supplier that we're getting them from is not quarantining their fish, and they're just selling them directly as soon as they are out of the bags for an hour or two. They're just pushing them right out the door. To me, that's really not good practices, and I would suggest to you that if you have a supplier that's doing those kinds of things, that you try to stay away from suppliers like that and find somebody that actually quarantines their fish and won't sell you those fish, absolutely, unless they know that they are ick-free or other problems are not developing in those tanks. They're under observation, and that's a good supplier who cares about you, cares about your tanks, and that's somebody you should be buying your fish from. If you get into a situation where these products are not working and you're having hole in the head, ick that is not being beaten by the ICX or the Paragard or the Prazi Pro or any of those things, then you've got to move up to the next step, and that is using antibiotics of some kind, ones that touch on fungal infections, bacterial infections, parasitical situations, all in one. And that would be the first one I would use in that, and the most mild would be Sulfaplex. And the reason for that is this is an antibiotic, but it is the type of antibiotic that is very mild, that is not going to, bring that stress level of your fish way up and create a lot of problems in your tank where your fish quit eating or have other problems. This is where you want to start with that. Now, there are so many out on the market. There is Sulfaplex, there's Metroplex, which would be for your internal problems. There is also, of course, Canaplex here, which I like. There is PolyGuard, which is another really great antibacterial. I don't happen to have any of that on hand here, but that is something that you also want to use. Now, if that doesn't work, make sure you flush your tank out by doing a big water change and also putting some carbon in your tank, because you want to get those old medications out of the tank before you start adding others, because what happens is you get a buildup of a bunch of different medications in your tank, and pretty soon your fish are being poisoned and the environment becomes so toxic. So make sure anytime that you're using a medication, if you're switching to another medication, make sure you wait 24 hours after the last time you've applied it. Do a 50 to 75% water change. 75% is extreme, I know, but if you can get away with a 75% and you know your fish can handle it, do that, and make sure that you wait about another couple of days before you start medicating again. And if you have to move up to something like Canaplex, which is 99% of the time, Canaplex is probably going to work. If not, a combination of Canaplex and Metroplex. If you read CChem's site, they're going to tell you to try to never use any of these things together, but I've had specialists who know a lot about this tell me that it is fine to do as long as you do it properly and with some guidance. And guidance meaning talking to somebody at a store where they have actual people who do nothing but look at the diseases and medications that they use and give you the best information that they possibly can to help you cure your fish. Now, this is something that you're not going to get. This is Gabe Posada's secret sauce that he uses down at Jack Watley, and I just happen to have some of it left over. The bottle that it came in originally had some problems, so I had to switch it over to this bottle. But there's instructions on the front of this. I don't want to go through the whole thing with you, but basically this is going to be very hard on your tank, and it's going to be very stressful on your fish, and this would be my last line of defense against a tank that is going down pretty fast. This does have some copper in it. It also has formaldehyde in it, so you want to be careful to make sure that when I give you the information in the comments or the information section down below here, that you read it very carefully, because I made a mistake and I overdosed my tank by almost 100% by reading this incorrectly. And I was so fortunate that I had a hose system that I could flush that tank really quickly and get that out of there. I didn't even lose a single fish. I was just surprised. I just didn't burn the living heck out of them, and it really was something that I was very, very fortunate that I didn't lose a bunch of fish. But anyways, long story short is, when we come back, I'm going to talk about a recent problem that I had with a tank, and we're going to show you that tank. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happened and how I finally cured it. It was not easy, and it's probably been one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with as far as disease in my tank since I've been doing this. And I lost one fish, like I said, but it could have been a lot worse. So when we come back, we're going to talk about that. So as I said, I want to talk to you about a particular tank where I had a problem. If you look at these fish right here and now, you would never know that a month ago, every one of these fish in here had darkened up and their slime coat was peeling off. They had patches all over them, and I tried all of the milder applications of medication that I could think of to use, such as salt, the Paragard, and so forth, and nothing seemed to work. And finally, I came up with a solution of using Canaplex. I want to make sure I get this right. It was Metroplex, Canaplex, together with some salt, and I had to do that for almost 10 days before these fish started to color back up. Thank God all of them continued to eat. Now, this did not seem to affect the smaller fish, such as the tetras that you see in here, and some of my bottom fish, like my cories, plecos, Siamese algae eaters, any of those fish. None of those seem to be affected by this. In fact, the angels didn't seem to be affected by this either. So I don't know what this was. I don't know what caused it. The only thing I can think of is I did feed some blackworms. It was from a new supplier, and somehow some kind of external parasite got into the tank, or bacteria got into the tank. And man, oh man, I gotta tell you, it was not fun. And I gotta say that I am very fortunate that I only lost one fish in this tank. And it was a beautiful fish, and I feel bad about it, but it's just something that is going to happen now and then. If you're in this hobby and you think that things are gonna go perfect all the time, even when you do things right, and I always do things as right as I can, you're going to mess up somewhere along the way, make a mistake, and something's going to happen. It's just the nature of the way it is. So anyways, that's what happened with this particular tank. As you can see, all of these fish are extremely healthy. They're beautiful. They're doing really well. And I'm very, very pleased that I was able to get this under control. When we get back, we're going to say some final words about disease and medication, and remind you of a couple of things not to do when you get fish in, or if you're just keeping fish in general, because people make a lot of mistakes early on, and even those that have been doing it a long time can slip up and make a mistake. When we come back, we're going to talk about that. So, like I said, one of the last things I want to talk about that I think is really important and is a big preventative way of making sure that your fish stay healthy is to make sure that you're not cross-contaminating your tanks. In other words, don't use the same nets and any other tools that you might be using to clean your tanks, to do water changes, hoses, and those kinds of things. Do not cross-contaminate, because you are just inviting problems in. You may have a tank that, for example, only has some rams in it, and a few tetras, and some cleanup crew, like cories and plecos and those sort of things. And you may think that that tank is healthy because you've had it for a very long time, but there may be diseases in that tank that will attack, say, a discus or an angelfish, and you don't know it until you cross-contaminate by using the same net, by not thinking, real quick about the fact that you had not disinfected those items. Now, what I like to do is keep a 5-gallon bucket around. I keep 2 or 3 of them around for certain tanks. I always have a little bit of bleach in there. Every time I use a net, anytime I'm using hoses or anything like that to clean out or do water changes, I run some disinfectants through there and some bleach through there just to make sure that I'm getting it right. And then I flush it out really good with as hot of water as I can possibly get out of my sink. And I'm very fortunate here because we have a separate water tank that I use just for fish, and I can get that water pretty darn hot, and there's nothing that's going to survive in there. With the bleach in the water, there's nothing that's going to survive. So be careful about cross-contamination, be aware of it, make sure as you're moving through your day and you're taking care of multiple tanks like I have here, that you are aware that you can cross-contaminate very easily, and that means washing your hands in between. Every tank when I feed, I wash my hands in between before I go to the next tank and feed. That's how anal I am about this and how serious I am about cross-contamination. People can laugh at that, but it has saved me in the many years that I've been doing this. Like I said, the one problem that I had over here was probably something that I made a mistake on by bringing in black worms from somewhere else, and I just got caught off guard, and it really did not work out well for me. So it's important, it's very, very important to understand that you really have to make sure that everything that you're using as far as tools, nets, anything that you're using on your tanks are disinfected and taken care of and cleaned before using them on the next tank. Thanks for joining me today. Please give me a like on this. Also, leave your comments down below here. Hit that bell up there. And again, thank you so much if you've already subscribed to the channel. I really appreciate that. For those of you who have not subscribed, we've got some great information on here. We're up to 426 videos over a 3-year period on this channel. We don't have 90,000 people watching this channel, but that's okay. I'm not in it for the money, I'm in it for the hobby itself. But I appreciate it, and also give me a thumbs up, write a comment, subscribe to the channel, and the best way to get my channel out there is to mention it to your friends, pass it on. Thanks for joining me today. We will see you on the next one. Until then, we're out of here.